Welcome to this explainer. Today we're doing something really fascinating. We're peeling back the very complicated, sometimes messy layers of human behavior to look at Nietzsche's final psychological truths. We're going to reveal the deep emotional wounds that are driving the people around you and, well, if we're being totally honest with ourselves, probably driving you too. So let's jump right in, because what we're about to uncover is going to completely change how you view every single interaction you have from here on out.
You know, from a young age, we're basically trained to take people at their word. We just assume that when someone argues a point, they're laying out facts, reason, and logic. But what if they aren't? What if nobody actually speaks purely from logic? The reality, as we're going to see, is much deeper and far more emotional than we've been led to believe. People don't always speak from truth. Often, they're speaking from survival, from ego, and from fear. Their words, they're mostly just armor. So let's dive into Section 1, Logic as a Shield, which brings us to Truth 13.
We have this habit of taking communication right at face value. On the surface, someone might tell you, "I don't believe in love, it's just a chemical fantasy." Now that sounds like a super rational, logical fact they've arrived at after years of careful observation, right? But underneath that surface argument is a totally different story. It's the underlying wound. They aren't just stating an objective fact. They are literally using logic as a shield to protect a pain they absolutely never want to feel again. We all have this intense tendency to build our worldviews based entirely on what hurt us, and then we work backward, aggressively slapping logic on top to make sure we stay safe.
So here's the massive takeaway. Don't ask what they believe. Ask what broke them. Ask what scared them so badly that they're terrified to experience it a second time. When you start reframing people's arguments as defensive shields instead of personal attacks, everything changes. You stop reacting to their words like they're direct threats, and you finally start seeing the very real, very human fears running just beneath the surface.
Moving right along to Section 2, Reactions Reveal True Power. Here we're exploring Truths 14 and 15.
There's this incredible idea. Real strength isn't proven through domination, it's revealed through restraint. If you want to really know someone's character, just watch how they treat a person who cannot fight back. Have you ever noticed that the guy who aggressively mocks vulnerability is almost always terrified of his own? It's textbook projection. True power doesn't need to bark. True power is the quiet ability to sit with sadness without bolting for the door, and to witness weakness in someone else without feeling this sudden desperate urge to judge them.
When you look at how a wounded person operates versus a healed person, the contrast is wild. A wounded person naturally mocks vulnerability and immediately punishes mistakes, usually because they weren't allowed to make any mistakes themselves growing up. The strictness they project onto you is just an echo of the strictness they endured. But a healed person, they witness weakness without judgment. They forgive the things that could easily be punished. And they show grace, not because they're naive, but because they have already won their own inner war. They honestly just don't have anything left to prove.
And that flows perfectly into Truth 15. We all know that one person, right? The one whose every outfit, every story, and every entrance into a room just absolutely screams to be noticed. But that loud performance isn't real confidence. It is a deep, vibrating terror of being invisible. It's a fundamental fear of living and dying without leaving a single mark on the world. Because they literally cannot bear the silence. They start using these indirect demands for love. It turns into constant performing, creating totally unnecessary drama, or orchestrating pure chaos out of thin air. The child who is ignored or sidelined early on becomes the adult who wildly overcompensates. They use these exhausting, roundabout ways to demand the love and validation they're just too afraid to directly ask for.
Which brings us to Section 3, Envy Disguised as Attack, covering the pretty tough reality of Truth 16.
Envy is basically an unspoken desire. It's your soul quietly saying, "I want that too, but I don't believe I'm allowed to have it." Tearing down someone who's successful or unapologetically free is just easier than admitting you admire them. Why? Because seeing someone casually embody the exact freedom you've abandoned is a brutally painful reminder of what you've lost. At the end of the day, throwing criticism is always an easier emotional lift than being vulnerable enough to admit admiration.
Now we're getting to the absolute core of the onion with Section 4, Behavior is Just Biography, which breaks down Truth 17.
People repeat the roles they were forced to play and the fears they were taught to carry. We really love to think that people evolve just because they acquire new beliefs or read a great self-help book, but the reality? They mostly just repeat. Every adult you meet in the boardroom, at the grocery store, or sitting in your own living room is often just a child still waiting to feel safe, endlessly acting out the painful dynamics they never quite escaped.
The link between a childhood environment and adult behavior is totally direct and unforgiving. If a kid gets punished or mocked just for showing emotions, they often grow into a cold, hyperlogical adult who treats feelings like a liability. If they were never heard as a child, they become the adult who never listens, the one dominating every conversation because they're absolutely starved for a voice. Behavior is just biography. If you really want to read someone's character, you have to look past who they are today and ask who they had to be to survive their past.
Finally, we hit Section 5, Patterns are a Confession. Let's unpack our final concept today, Truth 18.
Think about the patterns you see all the time. Ghosting the second things get a little too close. Overworking just to completely avoid the terror of sitting still. Flirting with literally everyone in the room but genuinely connecting with absolutely no one. These are not just quirky little personality traits for a dating profile. They are profound confessions. They are silently shouting, "This is how I protect myself," and "This is the exact pain I'm terrified of repeating." If you learn to listen to the repeating patterns instead of just the spoken words, you will hear the truth long before it's ever said out loud.
When you actually start listening deeply to these patterns instead of just reacting to surface words, something amazing happens. You stop personalizing their behavior. You stop judging them for how they defend themselves. You become a mirror, not a weapon. You become someone who finally sees the scared child hiding behind the harsh critic, the gripping fear behind the loudest bully. And in that moment of profound clarity, you can start choosing grace.
Which brings us to the most important question of this whole explainer. Which of these hidden truths are you spotting in your own patterns right now? Because ultimately, learning to read others is really just holding a mirror up to yourself. It shows you that the behaviors you judge, or even the ones you secretly admire in others, are exactly the unspoken truths you're carrying around. So the next time you react to someone else